The one thing I often like to refer to when you talk about modernizing electric system in a country is that a half year ago I was in a similar event in Israel. And it was hosted by the infrastructure minister, Uzi Landau. And the evening before the event, he had asked each of the keynote speakers to come and sit down with him and talk about clean energy in Israel. And he had everybody talk for 2 minutes, shorter than we have, Alberto. And it was interesting, everybody advocated for their particular area. Solar, wind, storage, you name it. And the next day, when I was in a panel together with the minister, I looked at the minister and I said, after yesterday's discussion, you must now be terribly confused. And he raised one eyebrow, looked amused, was nodding yes, because what we as an ecosystem often do, and you and I, Alex, talked before the session a little bit about it, is that everybody advocates for their particular area. What we're not doing as an ecosystem is to show in a country how all these different technologies and opportunities come together, that they're not mutually exclusive, and how indeed a modernized electric system can help enable us get to the ambitious number of 100% renewable topic. So that's what we have done. Last week we have brought all the smart grid organizations from several of the countries together in a global federation. And let me close, because I think we're all otherwise going a little bit over time, is that I know if you look at the United Nations climate negotiations, and I hope people forgive me, but it's a big animal. It's a big beast and extremely difficult to tackle and probably saying very obvious things. It needs to happen, and that discussion needs to run its course. But at the same time, I think it's critically important that we take the opportunity for bottoms-up approach, right? I know you, Scott, later will talk a little bit about what companies can do, but I think what can countries do in a practical manner? So what half a year ago in the summer, the Energy Secretary of the US, Steve Chu, pulled together a clean energy ministerial, where he invited the ministers from the G20 countries and 4 more countries together to talk about United Nations. Our climate negotiations are one thing, but what can we do at a practical level? If we develop somewhere a smart grid project in one country and we're also doing that in another country, are we reinventing the wheel? Or can we connect the dots and do that projects together and learn from each other? What practical areas for collaboration are there? So I think that's a very encouraging sign. So again, I'm very happy to have this discussion, looking forward to the questions, but clearly my focus in both my IBM and GridWise role is the modernization of the electric system and the opportunity we have in the developed world for leapfrog the technology, like for example in telecommunications has happened in many countries. Let me stop there, Alberto.
Thank you, Guido. Now, Mr. Alex MacGilvray, please.
Thanks very much, and it's thank you to everyone for giving me the opportunity to be here in Mexico, and congratulations to all the working groups for some very interesting and ambitious commitments and messages to go through to Cancun. I just want to make a few points. The first one, we heard yesterday from Barbara Cox that Siemens was turning over 25 billion euros in sales in clean technology. GE is also doing something similar, and worldwide maybe the kind of total market for climate-friendly, climate-limiting technologies might be something like $300 billion. Estimates that I've made, that HSBC bankers made recently, say that the market in 2020 could be $2 to $3 trillion. So the key point there is that 90% of the market for climate-friendly goods and services has got to be created in the next 9 years. It's taken 20 years to get to 300 billion, and we've got another 9 years to get to the market potential. So the fact that we're talking ambitiously is exactly right, because 9/10 of the work that needs to be done has to be done in the next 10 years. So that's great. The issue, I think, is that most of the market estimates that are made by banks and by consulting firms and by research projects like my Climate Competitiveness Project seem to kind of allocate most of the benefits to a kind of restricted group of countries: China, Korea, European Union, USA maybe, if it gets its act together, and a few other countries. And what's not clear is what is the share for the rest of the G20, let alone for the G77, down to countries like Egypt, in Africa. Many of you will know that in the Clean Development Mechanism, so far Africa has achieved 70 projects out of 3,000 There's some major inequalities in where the benefits are going to go to, and therefore countries like Mexico can set a really good example of how mid-level countries can really take advantage of the opportunities here. This is not a market that should just be left to the usual suspects. On that basis, I'd like to pick up on the point that was made in the last session about the oceans and to kind of flag up one particular issue, which is that in the issue of coral reef destruction, which is something that's in a very advanced stage, and with all of the ingenuity that companies like IBM can bring to solutions, probably can't solve that problem, and that it may be too late to solve the problem. So instead you have an issue about livelihoods. In the Coral Triangle, in Indonesia, the Philippines and other countries, you have a minimum of 150 million people who depend for their livelihoods on coral reefs, which are currently being destroyed through acidification and temperature rise of the oceans. It's not easy to work out the solution, and it's not evident that many people are working on that solution. So, two things there. One is more work needs to be done on some of these less glamorous, less high-tech things, and people need to think about livelihoods as well as technology in terms of providing solutions in the future. WWF, I'm pleased to say, is well aware of this Coral Triangle situation and is doing a good job of bringing attention to it, but I don't see the solutions being talked about there yet. So that's another challenge for the next 10 years. It's an immediate challenge. It's not something that may happen in 50 years. It is already happening. There are great examples of low and medium tech solutions being pushed out. In June, in Bangladesh, on one single day, 5 million compact fluorescent light bulbs were distributed all across Bangladesh with a saving of 300 megawatts of electricity demand. And that plan is now being supported by the World Bank. They plan to scale it up, and they've got plans for another 10 to 15 million light bulbs to be distributed. These aren't LED, these are quite basic compact fluorescent light bulbs, but it's the scale and the ambition and the drive that's exciting about that project. UNEP recently got behind a project for improved cook stoves in India, that had been led by the Shell Foundation. Again, this is very exciting. People have been trying to make this work for at least 20 years that I can remember, and probably more, but it seems like one more push is necessary to break down some of the inertia and some of the institutional difficulties of getting this technology to really be used in India. Other organizations in India and elsewhere working on solar lighting for remote areas, very ambitious. Terry, the Tata Energy Research Institute, has a program for 1 billion solar lamps. So people are really working at scale, and we can go on. There are examples from Kenya and other developing countries on green energy that are very exciting. Some of these are supported by companies like IBM and GE and Siemens. Others of them are much more bottom-up than that. We don't always need the highest tech solutions. Sometimes medium tech is pretty good as well. I'm going to finish, though, by saying that I've detected in looking at what we call climate competitiveness in 95 countries that there is one problem. And that problem is that the technology often doesn't take off. The innovative solutions don't take off. And the reason is because actually there's a lot of inertia in countries. Now, this may come as a big surprise to the Mexican audience, but in other countries that we've studied, we find that there's a lack of coordination sometimes between government departments, even rivalry between different ministries. The head of state says one thing, but the Minister of Finance tries to do another thing. Within the business community, the Chamber of Commerce may be less progressive than the 5 leading businesses in the country. You may have companies that come to a conference and talk about interesting initiatives, but in fact, when you look at the Carbon Disclosure Project, you see that their emissions are in fact rising year on year, not decreasing. You find that there's very little work being done through chambers of commerce to support small and medium enterprises in the country to gain the energy benefits that the big companies are getting. And you also find that consumer groups and NGOs aren't necessarily focused on the most effective strategies for engaging business and working with government. So you have this great mass of institutions in a country that all need to work together, and there is not enough being done to build capacity among those institutions. I'm not saying it's exciting work. It's not as fun as the high-tech frontier that we've heard a lot about over the last 2 days, but I am saying that I don't think the full benefits of the technologies and the solutions that we've heard about will be realized unless people work on capacity building in those in what I call the business ecosystem that has to deliver. And if you think of the potential benefits, i.e. the 90% of $3 trillion that could be available, it's got to be worth getting that institutional structure right so that countries like Mexico can really benefit from the examples. We know that Korea is well organized and has a lot of coherence in its policy direction, but we see a lot of examples of countries that aren't so well organized. I would include my own country, the United Kingdom, where I'm afraid to say we do have rivalry between ministries, and we do have a Chamber of Commerce that is not the most progressive in terms of its views about what businesses can be done, and we have NGOs who prefer to campaign than to collaborate. But there are examples of how you can do this, and I think I would put that on the map as a need for innovation in how to build capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. MacGilvray. Now, Mr. Scott Nyquist, please.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. We appreciate the opportunity to describe our views. I'm with McKinsey & Company, and we're a consultancy, and it gives us a chance to see what many different companies around the world are doing on this agenda. And if you are like most of the business leaders that we are dealing with around the world, you're very enthusiastic about the opportunities that exist inside your own company to reduce greenhouse gases, to be more sustainable. Very enthusiastic about that and pursuing them. You also will be nervous around what kind of government regulation might come in terms of actions that could hurt the economy, reduce the competitiveness of your sector, or even directly hurt your company. So given that world, what can you do? What can you do to help yourselves and also make sure that the world around you continues to operate in a way that will be profitable for your business? And we have found that there are enormous opportunities inside a company's operations to become more efficient. And let me just give you a couple examples. One chemical company was able to improve its profitability by $1 billion a year by systematically going through all its plants and finding opportunities to increase efficiency. And if you go inside a chemical plant, you'll find this morass of pipes. And some of these pipes will have very high temperature, high pressure steam in them. And if you look at them closely, you'll find out that a lot of these pipes won't be insulated well. There'll be leaks in the system. And a lot of times the steam that is left over will actually be vented to the atmosphere. And if you go into a plant and systematically put the insulation on, get the temperature of the steam right so it's exactly what's needed for the chemical reaction, find a way to use the excess steam to maybe generate power, you can have enormous savings that go right to the bottom line, reduce greenhouse gases, and improve the overall sustainability. Again, this is things that are small and detailed in a plant. It requires the frontline operators to rethink how they run their day-to-day activities. And if you build the right capabilities alongside all the things that they have to do to run their business, you can get real improvements. Other things that companies are doing are building new products and services. And these are many of these are the sexy types of things that are happening out there. We have the automotive industry coming up with hybrids and electric vehicles and learning how to use biofuels more effectively in their systems, and these are all very good. We talked about GE and Siemens and the enormous amount of new products that they're putting forward. But this is also a contribution that companies can make, is anticipate the needs of a low-carbon future and develop products and services that will enable you to be successful.